Okay, so I would say grab your favorite beverage, this is a nice coffee, and settle in because it's going to be a long video. I got a lot of questions to answer, y'all, and there are not yes or no answers, if you get my meaning. I'm going to be talking a lot. I started a Booktube channel. Why did I start a Booktube channel? Hi everyone, it's me, Jess. I am moving around trying to get the glare from the window out of my glasses so that it doesn't annoy people for this video. So I am surrounded by books and dogs, my two favorite things, and I'm here to answer your questions in celebration of 500 subscribers. First, I guess I will just say shout out to everyone again. Thank you so much for submitting the questions and for subscribing and supporting my channel. It's amazing. What a fun milestone and what a fun way to celebrate it. I got so many good questions. So like I said, I'm surrounded by books because there were so many bookish questions on the Q&A call out, and I just feel a little like, where do we begin in terms of the books? But we will take these questions one at a time. I've divided this section similarly to other YouTubers or booktubers who have done this before. The first section is going to be all of your bookish questions. The second section is going to be questions about Booktube and the Booktube channel. The third section is going to be personal questions, questions about my personal life, and then the last section is devoted to the dogs. So if you're here for the dogs, you can skip ahead to that last section. I'm gonna have to just name books in this video rather than describe books in this video. I'm sorry everyone, because there's so many questions. I'm just gonna name books rather than talk about what they're about. So the first question comes from Julie. Hi Julie. Julie is also Quebecois, and she asked me who is my favorite Canadian author. It's a great question to start with. It's a very difficult question to answer. A lot of these questions are favorites, and I struggle with favorites. I know that booktubers are supposed to have very clear and distinct ideas about what their favorites are, but I have a trouble with that. But I have narrowed it down, I guess. My favorite Canadian author is, without a doubt, Mona Awad. Okay, so I'm a huge Mona Awad fan, at least of late. Recently discovered and love Mona Awad's books. So if you've been around my channel, you probably already knew that. And then I would say before I got into Booktube and before discovering Mona Awad, my favorite Canadian author would probably have been Anne-Marie MacDonald. I had read, and she's from, I think she's from Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, I'm not sure, but she's from the East Coast. And she wrote a book called Fall on Your Knees, which I read and loved. Like, I was kind of obsessed with this book for some time. And then after that, I didn't read anything else of hers. I have a book of hers called Adult Onset, which I haven't read. So it's a little strange to say someone's a favorite author when you've only read one of their books. But I really loved that book. And I think I love Emily St. John Mandel. And I also really love Carol Shields. She, I would say, I would have been able to say was one of my favorite authors for a long time. I don't know if Carol Shields qualifies as a Canadian author because she's American born, but she did live in Canada for a big chunk of her writing life. So I kind of think of her as a Canadian author. I loved Larry's Party and the Stone Diaries. And then in addition, I really love Ruth Ozeki. Her book, A Tale for the Time Being, is a major favorite of mine, and so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Ruth Ozeki as well. And there are others, Miriam Taves and Margaret Atwood, of course, Mordecai Richler. So those are kind of my favorite Canadian authors. There are other books that I really like that I could mention, like The Two Solitudes by Hugh McLennan. When I was a kid, I really liked Lucy Maud Montgomery. There are just so many. It's hard to choose. And recently I read some really great Canadian authors as well that were sort of new to me authors. So I'm really sorry for the chewing noises. It's just par for the course on my channel. If you're new to my channel, my dog Granola is almost 2 years old, but he makes a lot of noise. Sometimes it's a squeaky toy, sometimes it's just chewing, sometimes it's eating and drinking water too loudly. So yeah, apologies ahead of time for that. So thanks so much, Julie, for the question. The next question is from MJ. MJ was a big supporter of my channel early on, and her question is, what is one book that you recommend over and over and over again to people? So over the years, I've recommended different books to people, whatever the book was of the moment that I was really into and enjoying. For a long time, the book that I would recommend was Birdsong by Sebastian Fox, because I was also kind of obsessed with that book. And then it became Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. And I don't even have copies of those books because I've handed those books off to other people and given those books away. Although now I'm thinking, oh, I really wish I had my copies of those books. I love them so much. For a while there, it was Bunny by Mona Awad, because after I read Bunny, not last summer, but the summer before, and I made a reading vlog about it, so you can check it out. I just was really crazed about Bunny, like so many people were. I think it's quite popular. And then, of course, Ruth Ozeki's A Tale for the Time Being, I've recommended to people. I loved My Policeman and recommend that to a lot of people. So I loved Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. I've recommended that to loads of people. I really like Severance by Ling Ma. I recommended that to people, more dystopian. One book that I really love is The History of Love by Nicole Krauss. I recommended that to loads of people. Last year in my favorite books, we had Caleb Azuma Nelson's Open Water, which I've recommended to a lot of people. And then, of course, there are authors that I'll recommend to people. So not just books, but I'll generally say, like, have you ever read anything by Daphne du Maurier? And if you haven't, why haven't you? No. Or I'll say, you know, I really think you should read something by Daphne du Maurier. I know Rebecca had its moment. I think my favorite is Jamaica Inn or My Cousin Rachel. It's kind of a toss-up. I'll recommend Claire Fuller's Unsettled Ground, which I really loved from last year. From this year, probably I'll be telling people to read Tin Man, because I read it for the first time. So that's kind of a general idea of books that I have been recommending lately and have recommended kind of over time. I'll ask people, like, have you ever read any Zadie Smith? And if you haven't read any Zadie Smith, I'll say, you know, you really need to read White Teeth, for example. It just depends who I'm talking to and what they're interested in and what they like. If someone really likes mysteries, I'll ask them if they've ever read any Tana French, and I'll recommend them Tana French. So kind of depends what people's preferences are. So thanks, MJ, for that question. The next question comes, well, there's a couple of them coming from Charlie. Charlie Brooks Reads. She asked me 3 questions. What is your favorite comfort read? This is a tough question. I generally don't comfort read a specific book, even though I might love a book. I do have a comfort kind of genre. I tend to read for comfort mystery books or detective books. I always loved detective stories. Kate Atkinson has this series that starts with case histories, the Jackson Brodie series. I haven't read all of the books in that series, but that would be one example. Or, as I already mentioned, Tana French. I will turn to a mystery series or detective series like that as a comfort. If I'm just feeling like I want to read, not necessarily for the sake of like keeping my mind active and being sort of abreast of the conversations that are going on, and I just want to read for comfort or relaxation. Not that the other reading isn't pleasurable, it definitely is, but sometimes I'll go for that mystery detective story. It's kind of my comfort zone. Another question from Charlie Brooks Reads was a short book recommendation. I'm actually going to make a video leading into Shorty September of short books that I would recommend, because I have quite a few that I can recommend, but I did pull a couple from that list to just quickly mention. In terms of modern authors, short books that I've read in the last couple of years that I really loved, Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson, and I guess Small Worlds, which I have out from the library, but I haven't read yet. So I can't recommend it, but I can definitely recommend Open Water. I would say Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. I really thought this was a really good short. It's only, I don't know, short book, less than 200 pages. I love Flush by Virginia Woolf. This is a really sweet short book I did a reading vlog about when I first got my puppy Nola. I would recommend Of Mice and Men. I haven't read The Pearl by John Steinbeck, but I think Of Mice and Men is an incredible book, and it's nice and short, and it's an amazing book. Everybody should maybe read it. I don't know. I always feel weird saying everybody should read it, but it's just a really, really excellent book. And then I really loved E.M. Forster's A Room with a View, which is also a fairly short book. I found it very enjoyable. So those are some short book recommendations, but look for that video because I'll be making a longer video. And then Charlie also asked me what my favorite classic is, and I do have it's funny because all the other stuff I can have a hard time with picking favorites for, but I absolutely have a favorite classic. There's hands down my favorite classic, and if you've been around my channel for a little while, you will know this. I have so many copies of it. My favorite classic is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I love Wuthering Heights so much. I just adore Wuthering Heights. I just adore the book. I think it's an incredible book. I love it so much. And it's my favorite classic for sure, hands down. Oh, the torture of Wuthering Heights. Jen G asked a few questions. The first one is, are you a rereader? This is such an interesting question because I'm generally not a rereader. There are only a few books that I've reread, and I've reread them recently, Wuthering Heights being one of them. I've also reread The Picture of Dorian Gray. So there's a couple of classics that I've reread recently, but I'm not generally a rereader. I do think that that might change, actually. I might become a rereader. I'm debating. I might become a rereader. There are some books that I'm thinking I would like to read again, and it might be a project. One example would be, I talked about in my video of reading women in translation. It's The Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante, and a couple of people have kind of said, hey, you know, you need to read the fourth one, because I confessed in that video that I haven't read the fourth in that grouping. And I did read them probably a decade ago when they first came out, or longer. And I was thinking that it would be a really fun project for me to reread them and then read the fourth one and then watch the series. But who has the time? So it's possible that I might become more of a rereader, but it's very difficult to balance wanting to read new books and participate in some of the conversations that are going on and rereading books that you love. So I'm a little up in the air on that. I think in general, I would say I'm not a rereader. Genji also asked, all-time favorite book you think everyone should read? So as I said when I talked about the books that I recommend, I think Bunny is probably one of those books because Mona Awad is Canadian. I recommend because I like to promote Canadian writers, and I also just think it's such a good book. I think that Bunny has just been so popular and so many people have talked about Bunny that it's probably had its time in the limelight. So there are a few other books. I think Drive Your Plow, also pretty widely recommended. I often will recommend it to people. I like recommending Thérèse Raquin because I think it's so good, and I think that maybe it's not that widely read. Zola is not that widely read, so I like to recommend Thérèse Raquin because it's such a good read. And then I have two nonfiction books that I recommend a lot that I think everybody should read. In particular, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. And the reason that I recommend it to people is because it's just such a beautifully written book, and it's such a powerful book about confronting the issues in our system around how women are treated, or how people who are sexually assaulted are treated, and how victims / survivors are able to respond to that. It's just so important. It's so well written and it's so moving. So there's that. And then I do find myself recommending, for anyone who's interested in true Crime, All Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, because I feel that this is just such a unique situation. It's very sad that she passed while she was writing this book. And I think it highlights the importance of rookie armchair, whatever you want to call them, detectives who are investigating cases because they just have to know the answer, but that they are often more successful than the actual investigators themselves, and just what a contribution that makes. I got really obsessed with this book, and I recommend it and think people should read it. The first half is better than the second half because the second half was finished by someone else, and she's also a really beautiful writer. So I could have talked about other books that I think are really important, like Giovanni's Room, or like there's just so many books to recommend, and there's so many books that are important, but those are just a few that I think are really good. I think also The Inconvenient Indian, that's a nonfiction book that I like to recommend to people if they want to read about a Canadian Indigenous experience. I think that one's really good too. We recommend different books for different reasons, right? Depending on what we think people should know or learn or understand better. So Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf asked me some stellar questions. She asked, roughly how many books do you own? So Alice, I had to go and count my books because I've never counted my books before. I don't keep them on a spreadsheet. I don't know how many books I own. I counted and I got up to around 500, and that was pretty much the whole entirety of what I have in my apartment. I think I might have more than that, so somewhere between 500 and 600 books is what I would say I own. So not as extensive a library as the prescription. I think the prescription is to have 1,000 books for a complete library. I don't have that yet, but I do have an awful lot of physical books, and I would say the second part of the question was how many of those are on your TBR, and I would say probably a good half of those are books that I haven't read yet that I've purchased in the last year or two since starting my Booktube channel, because I've been a lot more active buying books since I started my Booktube channel. It's definitely made me buy more books to start a Booktube channel. That wasn't a question, but I'm answering it anyway. The next question is really hard. If you could keep 5 books, what would they be and why? And this is where we really get into the differences between what I recommend and what I cherish. And I notice there's a difference between those two things. The 5 books that I would keep if there was like a fire or something and I had to run out and I could only keep 5 books, these are them. The first, for sure, would be Anything by Franz Kafka. Probably his short stories. This isn't the only collection I have. I have another collection of short stories, but I was running around trying to find it and I'm not sure where it is at this moment. This year I read The Hunger Artist, I've read The Metamorphosis, and I haven't read all of Kafka's short stories, but I think that if I could only have 5 books, I would want to have Kafka's short stories because there's so much in each of those short stories to consider and to think about. It's possible that the themes are repeated, but I still think that it would keep my mind endlessly contemplating our existence and the meaning of our existence if I had a Kafka short story collection with me. So definitely I would bring that. I would bring Orlando by Virginia Woolf. I haven't read a lot of Virginia Woolf, but I do love the writing style and I do love this book. So I would bring it and I would probably reread it. This is actually another book that I've reread. Oh, sorry. I have read Love in a Cold Climate, but I haven't read The Pursuit of Love. This is actually a Nancy Mitford. I think it has all 3 novels. I don't know if that's allowed or if I'm cheating. Oh, it has The Pursuit of Love, The Blessing, and Love in a Cold Climate. So it has 3 of her novels, and that's kind of a cheat. But I guess they're short. So I would bring that, or I would keep that. I would also keep Anna Karenina. And this translation specifically, I really love Tolstoy's writing. I started War and Peace and then kind of abandoned it. So I don't think that I would necessarily keep War and Peace, but I would keep Anna Karenina because I think that I could endlessly reread this and just take a lot of pleasure out of the writing. Oh, and I should say the reason why I would keep the Nancy Mitford is because it's so funny and you definitely need something to make you laugh as well as to make you think. This one I would keep just for the beauty of the writing. in the story. And then the last one is a book that I am just so enamored with right now, Middlemarch by George Eliot. I think I would keep this as one of my top 5 because I think it's just I would just endlessly enjoy reading this book over and over again. So for a non-rereader, I think that's actually a pretty good list of books that I would be okay or be really happy with keeping and rereading. And they are all classics. No bathroom breaks for me. It's gonna be a long video. Can you tell that I'm back in my teaching days? Like, no bathroom breaks. It's gonna be a long class. So the third question that Alice asked me is, what is the strangest book you've ever read? So I will say that Mona Awad's last 2 books, All's Well and Bunny, are pretty strange. They're strange, like they're very, very strange. But other than that, another Canadian book that I read that I actually didn't like very much when I talked about it on my channel, that was probably one of the strangest books I've ever read, is Bellevue Square. This book is about a woman who has a doppelganger, and I thought it was going to be a mystery, but it turns out to be kind of really very different from that, and it gets very, very strange as we go, and more convoluted and more weird and harder to understand. And that's all I'm going to say. It's one of the weirdest books I've read. I haven't read that many weird books, but Bellevue Square is definitely one of the stranger ones that I've ever read. Jess, nice name, Jess. Jess at Jess Book Girl TV asked me about Lost Girls, which I just read in a reading vlog, and I'm going to wrap up at the end of August if I liked it or not. So Jess, you're going to have to wait for my wrap up for that, or you can watch the vlog if you have time. Her follow-up question was, this is a really good question. What book or what author or book got you into reading in the first place, kind of thing? And I can say that there are kind of 2 experiences that I'll share here. The first is, and I don't have a copy of this book either, which is kind of a shame. When I was young, in my early teens, I read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I remember reading the beginning of that book. There's a passage in the beginning of that book. I can't recall it at this moment. And I remember reading it, and I remember saying to one of my parents, or both of my parents at the time, this is such a beautiful passage. It was like the first time that I had maybe wanted to highlight a passage in a book because I thought it was so beautifully written or so beautifully expressed. And I think it was at that moment that I realized, oh, I love words, I love reading, I love well-crafted, poetic, lyrical writing. And descriptive writing. I knew that I liked descriptive writing at that moment, I think. So A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is one that really got me, and it gave me the bug. And then when I was in high school, a couple things happened when I was in high school. I'll talk about another incident from high school a little later in the video. When I was in high school, I had a grade 12 English teacher who taught us Picture of Dorian Gray. And I just thought it was very well taught. The way he taught the book he was very engaging. And I just became kind of obsessed with this book, and I became obsessed with the book that Dorian was influenced by in this book. It's like a book within a book. And I remember going to parties in high school and wanting to talk to people about the Picture of Dorian Gray. Like, that was my topic of conversation at parties. Sometimes I would look smart. Oh, I was such a nerd. But yeah, so The Picture of Dorian Gray is another book that kind of got me more into books and reading. So thanks for that question, Jess. Petra asks, how many countries have you read from? So Petra, I tried to count. I have Argentina, France, Russia, Germany, Japan, Zambia. I just read Zambia for the Women's World Cup. Poland, Italy, Korea, Vietnam, Denmark. I don't know. I kind of lost count after that. I'm sure I'm missing some countries. I'm sure I've read from other countries. In addition to that, Nigeria. Yeah, so quite a few, but I'm sure I haven't exhausted the list of countries that I could read from. The follow-up question was, do you have any countries on your wish list? So I don't have any countries on my wish list, but I do have a couple books that I want to read that are on my wish list that are books. Well, I know that the Australian readathon is coming up. I've only read Sorrow and Bliss from an Australian author. I'm sure I've read a few other Australian authors without realizing they're Australian, so I think I want to read some more Australian writers. And that challenge challenge is coming up, so that's a good opportunity to do that. Yeah, other than that, I just kind of have books on my wish list that I would like to read. There's a book from Iceland that I want to read called Miss Iceland. So thanks, Petra, for that question. Gemma from Gemma Books asks, what were your favorite books as a kid? This is such a good question. So I already talked about A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, but even before that, when I was a little kid, my parents read with me a lot. I think my mom read The Hobbit to me and I wasn't like in love with it. She loved The Wind in the Willows. I wasn't in love with it. I think I really started enjoying the books when I think we read like Jacob Tutu and the Hooded Fang. I was like pretty into Jacob Tutu and the Hooded Fang for a while. And I remember reading Choose Your Own Adventure books, which I loved at the time. And of course, Anne of Green Gables, which I have. And there was a TV series made here in Canada that I used to watch that I loved. So this is my old copy. You can see it says, oh, it's kind of cheesy how it says. To Jessica from Mommy and Daddy, 1978. Oh, I've just told you my age. There we go. Oops. I'm not going to tell you how old I was when they gave me the book. There. I'll leave a little bit to your imagination. And then the other book that I wanted to mention was The Secret Garden, which I remember really, really loving. And I got a copy from this Mint Editions. I'd like to reread that one because, of course, I read it when I was just a little kid. Gemma also asked, best book of the year so far, and is it better than the best of last year? So I haven't done a best books of 2023 yet this year. I'm still, Middlemarch is going to be for sure, mixing up the classics with contemporary fiction for choosing your best ofs. Last year I combined the classics because I don't know. Sometimes I've done them separately. The best classics I read this year, the best contemporary fiction I've read this year. I don't know what I'll do this year, but Middlemarch will definitely be on my best of. I haven't even done like my review of it. Definitely Tin Man, definitely Migrations, which I recently talked about. And I really think also that Our Share of Night is going to be up there in terms of best books so far this year. I've read a lot of other good books as well. Trespasses by Louise Penny comes to mind. I really liked The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. I don't know if it compares to last year, to be honest. Like Middlemarch will. But last year I read Daphne du Maurier, My Cousin Rachel, and I read Frankenstein last year. And I had Open Water, so maybe Small Worlds will be up there. But last year was really good in terms of the best books I read. And I guess I should have talked about Daphne du Maurier when I talked about favorite books or favorite classics, because I do love Daphne du Maurier. So many wonderful books, hey? And then Gemma asked about the dogs. They'll come at the end of the video, Gemma, okay? Okay? Amy C asks me, what are my top 3 classics? So I think by now you probably have a pretty good sense. Wuthering Heights, Orlando, if I have to pick 3. And then I was debating between one of Daphne du Maurier's books or Zola's Thérèse Raquin. I don't know where I put it now. Thérèse Raquin. I think in my 3rd spot it's really difficult. Frankenstein, I love. So I think it's really difficult at that point. Like I really love Shirley Jackson too. At that point it's difficult to say. But I think my 2 favorite classics so far, Orlando and Wuthering Heights. I would really like to read more Virginia Woolf because I did also really like Flesh, and I think Virginia Woolf could be a favorite classic author for me as well. Thanks for that question, Amy. So now we're going to get into sort of bookish things that aren't about books specifically. Jennifer at Jennifer Loves Books asked, do you have any bookish pet peeves? Why, yes, I do. I do, in fact, have a few bookish pet peeves. I don't have a lot of bookish pet peeves, but I do find I have a problem with hardbacks. I think if you've watched my channel for a little while, you know I don't like hardbacks. They're poorly made. They fall apart. Once the spine breaks, the spine sometimes comes off. I think they're really cheaply made. Unless you're getting a cloth bound special edition, and even then I'm not 100% sold, I really don't like hardbacks for the most part. So that, I guess it's a bookish pet peeve. I don't know. It's just something I don't like. I really don't like stickers on books. Oh man, it makes me so annoyed, especially when it's one that you can't remove. Like this says HBO on it. I just read Lost Girls and it had a Netflix sticker on it. And right now I'm really mad at Netflix. So I don't want the stickers on the books. that really bothers me. I think it bothers a lot of people. In terms of what are my bookish pet peeves when it comes to narratives and writing, I really dislike when an author has to tie things up. I think a lot of people feel this way. I buddy read Black Cake this year with Kellyanne Mitchell, and some of it was too neatly tied up for me. I was willing to forgive it in that book because I thought that was a really good book. Sometimes I've read books where it's like, there's no way that this person would be at this place at this time and that this would happen. And then I get really irritated. I feel like it's kind of like authors sometimes only have two ways to go with mysteries or thrillers. And they can either go the very predictable way or they can go the non-predictable way, which can be really good when you don't see it coming, but it can be not believable. And that I really dislike. I really dislike that in books. And then finally, I really don't like when books, particularly I guess books if they're in a series or even, I don't know, I have a really hard time when books are all different sizes and different heights and different. I'm trying to embrace it. My bookshelf, I just did a reorganization of my bookshelf, which maybe I'll share with everyone on my channel, but my bookshelf, I did it by just alphabetical order by genre, and it's so mixed up and there's so many different heights, and I don't know. I like conformity. I would like to have the same copy of all the books, maybe in different colors or something, but in general, or at least the same height. If they could just be the same height, I'd be okay with it. They don't have to all be the same. Kat from Lit with Kat asked me, what about annotating? Do you usually annotate? And I think for this, so my relationship with annotation is a really interesting one, and I was thinking about making an annotation video. There are so many annotation videos out there, and I think annotation is, for whatever reason, kind of a hot topic right now. I annotate, but I am I've always been kind of a very light annotator. If you take, for example, my copy of E.M. Forster's Room with a View, I just lightly annotated different passages that I would maybe want to remember or might want to read when I was reviewing it on my channel. I think Kat asked specifically, do you write in your books? I'm not there yet. I'm not at the point where I can write with a pen in my book. I did get these by recommendation, these sticky notes. They're clear. So for example, you can see for this, I've written on the sticky note and it's clear, so you can see the writing underneath, so you could write your notes about the book that way. I haven't tried that yet. But I want to be more of an annotator. I'm really interested in it too, and I'm really kind of thinking I'm going to become a crazy annotator. So for example, Milkfed, which I just read, I used different tabs for different things in the book. Like I had avocado, I don't know if you guys can see, but I have avocado tabs and cherry tabs. So I used the avocado tabs for every time that she talked about something funny, and I used the cherry tabs for every time there was something romantic. So I've started to do that where I have a bit of a legend and I give the tabs different colors, have different, or pointing out something different in the book. So I'll talk about this more when I do my review of Middlemarch. But for example, for Middlemarch, I do have this kind of way that I annotated where pink was comedy, this color was love, this color was language, role of women. And then I kind of tried to do highlighting, but I just haven't been able to highlight the book. I'm just not there yet. So I have been writing in the margins in pencil. I've been underlining in pencil like I have here, and writing in the margins in pencil. That's about as far as I've gotten with annotation. I am not at the point where I can use pen in my books. I could get there one day. I don't know, but I will just say just quickly that this level of annotation for Middlemarch, I thought it would really take away from my enjoyment of the book, and it hasn't at all. If anything, it's heightened my enjoyment of the book. But that's just maybe my brain and my nerdiness that is making it better. a better reading experience for me. The only thing I would say is that you got to carry those tabs around with you, because if you're carrying your book around with you, you got to have those tabs with you, because it's nothing more irritating than finding something you want to tab and not having those tabs with you. I had another question from a viewer about a specific author. Angela Craw asked me, have you ever read any Clarice Lispector, who I did a little bit of research on. I guess she's like the Brazilian Kafka or something. So I have not read any Clarice Lispector, but I am definitely intrigued now. And I feel like I need to rush out and find something. Maybe if you've read any Clarice Lispector, or you know anything about Clarice Lispector, maybe you can let me know, because I don't know anything about Clarice Lispector. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Gail asks me, do you listen to bookish podcasts? And if you do you have any that you could recommend? So I don't listen to bookish podcasts as much as like some other podcasts, for example, but I do have a couple that I could recommend that I really like. There's Books Unbound by Ariel Bissett and Raylene LeMay. I used to watch Ariel's videos when I first started out on Booktube. I started out as a Booktube watcher, so we'll get to the Booktube channel questions in just a minute, but I started out as a Booktube watcher, and her channel was one of the ones that I really enjoyed watching. And she has a podcast, and they actually have a YouTube channel where they have filmed themselves recording the podcast if you want to watch them doing their podcast. It's very meta. The other one that I really like is Diving In with Virginia Seymour and Louise Jones. I really like their podcast. I find it's very insightful in terms of the reviews and the comments on books that they talk about. I like Marlon and Jake Read Dead People. Marlon and Jake Read Dead People is hosted by Marlon James, who wrote A History of Seven Killings, and his editor, Jake Morrissey, who's the executive editor at Riverhead Books. And in each of these episodes, they talk about authors, specifically dead authors. And it's just it's a good podcast. I really like it. So there are some recommendations for bookish podcasts. That would be a fun video to do as well. Maybe leave in the comments below if you know of any good bookish podcasts that you could recommend. So we're up to channel questions. Jen G asked me, what made you decide to start a Booktube channel? And the follow-up is, were you nervous to start one as an educator? I started a Booktube channel because, well, first I didn't know anything about Booktube. So I was introduced to Booktube by my daughter. As grown adults are introduced to the best things by their kids, right? Especially their teen kids. And this was during the pandemic. And I remember she watched Katie like religiously. Katie from Books and Things. And so I started watching Booktube, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. People get on YouTube and talk about books. This is incredible. And then I was like, I think I could do this. I think this would be really fun. And I was going through a really, really difficult time. My dad was really sick. It was during the pandemic. It was just really a very hard time, and I just needed something else to shift my focus. So I was like, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. And I remember that I was watching Emma at Drinking by My Shelf a lot. I really liked her channel. I liked her energy. And I remember that she was doing a Taylor Swift readathon, and I thought, that's it. I'm going to start with Taylor Swift readathon, and you can go back to look at those old videos. Like, they're a little cringy when I watch them, but you can go back and watch them. And I was doing that readathon, and I was talking about my picks for the readathon, and then I reviewed the books that I read for that readathon. And that's when I reread Wuthering Heights, and that was the beginning of Booktube for me. In terms of being nervous about being on Booktube as an educator, I think there are times where, literally though, when I started my Booktube channel, I really didn't think anybody would ever watch me. I thought it was just, I'm just doing this for fun. If like 2 people watch, I'll just be doing it for those 2 people. And I really, really, very innocently, I got so excited when, like, I don't know, 17 people watched my channel. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. All these people are watching my channel. Wow, wow, wow. I don't even know these people. Wow. I was freaking out. And then I did get a bit nervous. I thought, oh boy, what am I going to do? Like, I have to be really careful what I say. I have to be really careful about my opinions as an educator. And I realized that as a public educator, as a public employee and living in Canada, I think I just started to treat it like I would if I was in my classroom. And I'm very careful about the things that I say. It's not to say that it's not scripted, as everyone can tell, but I'm very conscious already about the way I speak in front of people because I'm in a classroom. And I think just years of that kind of, not so much censorship, but just that kind of observation. I have a way of sort of observing while I'm speaking. And of course, with YouTube, you also have the advantage of being able to edit. I just thought, well, you know, if I can be in a classroom and talk about these topics in a way that I'm comfortable with and seems to be just fine, then I will continue to talk about them. And if I'm doing it on a public forum like YouTube, it should be okay as well. If anything, it'll be beneficial to people potentially. So for that, I think I'm comfortable. I'm okay with it. So I hope that answers your question, Jen. Amy C asks, how did you decide on your channel name? Yes, my channel name. So when I started my channel, I was looking at a lot of the other channel names and I was thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to say, you know, first of all, my name Jessica is a very common name. So I didn't want to use anything with my name because I didn't think it would stand out enough. I was trying to think of something that would stand out. And when I was young, this is another story about when I was young about Kafka, I had a teacher who taught us the Metamorphosis as a short story, and I just became kind of obsessed with Kafka because I started to learn more about Kafka's life, and the idea that he wanted to have all of his works burned really stuck with me. You know, I was kind of like a punk rocker, and it just really appealed to me, and I just got kind of obsessed with Kafka the person, Kafka the man, maybe more so than with Kafka's works per se. I was just really obsessed with him. And I read a lot of books about his life and it was kind of a thing. It was a thing. And then, so when I was starting my channel, I was reflecting on my own relationship to reading and books and learning. That's how I ended up with my channel name. And I just came up with Stalking Kafka because I was obsessed with Kafka on the one hand, and I was trying to think of ways to express that and what sounded good together. And I really liked the alliteration of Stalking Kafka. I was really happy with myself when I came up with the name, and I really liked the name, and I don't know, I think it's a good name. I'm happy with it. The only disadvantage to it is that it maybe doesn't represent completely everything about myself and my channel, but I'm really a fan of Kafka, so I think it's good. Shelly asks, do you enjoy reading as much now that you have your channel? I think the simple answer to that is probably more. Like, I think everything about Booktube has made me read more, be more interested in books, be having more conversations about books. I've since joined 2 book clubs since starting my channel. My whole life around books kind of started around the same time. It kind of started and stopped earlier in my life at different times, and I've been in book clubs before, but Booktube has really enhanced my reading life, for sure. I read way more, and I enjoy reading more because I know I'm going to be talking about it to you all, and I just enjoy it more for that reason, I think. Okay, so that's everything on the Booktube questions. Now for the life questions. So Scott just asked me life questions over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. He asked me to talk about my work life and what makes me such a smarty pants. Well, Scott, I think that, I don't know, I've been a teacher for a long time. Before I was a teacher, in terms of my schooling, the degree that you sometimes will see behind me, it's not to really be pretentious. I just, I'm pretentious, I guess. I don't know. I have an MBA, did a master's in business administration, and I did an undergraduate degree in international development. And I think I've always been a bit of a thinker, for lack of a better word. And anyway, my first job when I graduated from my MBA, or one of many jobs that I have, I started working in the film industry. So in my past professional life, before becoming a teacher, I was a film and television producer, and I worked at the same company that I worked for. We also made video games. So I have that in my background. So I know a lot about the film industry and know a lot about the TV industry in Canada and video production. I don't know, I've had a lot of different jobs, but my main job now is that I'm a teacher. I'm a college professor and I teach business. And I think one of the reasons why I love Booktube so much is because even though I enjoy teaching business and I like business, and at different points I've taught what most interests me in business, which is strategy, sometimes it's repetitive and sometimes it's a struggle for me to make the teaching interesting, although I really love the students. What I really love about Booktube is it just gives me an outlet for something intellectual that's maybe even a little bit more intellectual than what I'm teaching in business. So yes, I was a film and television and video game producer, and then I started a family and the hours were too demanding and I ended up becoming a teacher, teaching business at the college level. And I also have taught at the university level, and I've done other side projects in between. I've done research projects in the arts community here in Montreal and tried to keep one foot dipped into the arts world because it's what I enjoy. And I've done other things at the college. I've been the coordinator of my department. We're revising our program, so I'm doing a revision of the program. I can't talk about that very much on the channel. But I do find that the teaching profession does require you to be on your toes in a very specific way, and I think Booktube kind of requires you to be on your toes in a specific way. So I think I've gotten very accustomed and habituated to thinking about how to express ideas to a group of people in a way that they will understand, that will be easy for them to follow. I've just had a lot of practice doing that, standing in front of the classroom and explaining what are sometimes complex theories and ideas in simple ways. So I have a lot of experience with that, and I think that it's served me fairly well here on Booktube. Not to say that I'm that much of a smarty pants. There are definitely moments where my thinking is not making sense to me. It's sounding more like word dribble than anything else. Scott also asked me what's my favorite ice cream. I think forever and forever and forever it will probably be pistachio. It was my mom's favorite ice cream. I also am a sucker for a really good chocolate ice cream. There's a 6 times chocolate available at my local ice cream shop, and it's excellent. It's very, very good. Favorite thing not to do with books? Well, I love my dogs. I really love cooking, and I like baking. I like making pies. Pies are one of my things. I'm a knitter. I like knitting. Anything that's indoors and cozy. I also really do like the outdoors. More and more I'm doing more outdoors. I think I'm going to try to go I'm going to try cross-country skiing this year. I like paddleboarding and I like going hiking. I really love music. I love going to live shows. That's another thing that I love. I love photography. So I have an Instagram account. I like taking photos around town. I really like that as a form of visual expression. I love trivia. It's trivia night tonight. So, okay, so other life questions. Aaron asks from Aaron Facer's channel, if you could learn another language, what would it be? I think just quickly, it would probably be one of the Slavic languages. My heritage is Eastern European. I'm half British and half Czechoslovakian. And I think I would want to learn Russian or one of the other, so I could learn some of the other Slavic languages so that I don't know why, just because it's part of my heritage. So I think it would be something that I would want to learn if I was going to learn another language. I'm not great with languages. I can speak French and English, but that's pretty much it. Shelley asks, are you originally from Montreal? So for those of you that don't know, and Shelley, I'm not originally from Montreal. I'm from Halifax in Nova Scotia. That is where I was born. That is where I went to high school. That's where I did my MBA and my undergraduate degree. And yeah, I spent a lot of my life in Halifax before moving to Montreal, but I've probably spent about the same amount of time in Montreal now. On Instagram, Rosie. So nice to see your question, Rosie. Rosie Cockshut asks, favorite non-book thing you've tried because of Booktube? Some of the things that I've tried because of Booktube have been journaling and bullet journaling. I was really into bullet journaling for a while there during the pandemic. Doodling, drawing, painting. I actually have dabbled in painting, and I've taken a few painting classes. So those are the kinds of things that I've watched on YouTube or spend time doing on YouTube, mostly watercolor painting. From Pride and Parchment, I think it's Anna at Pride and Parchment, asked me just to talk about my life outside of Booktube. I think I've done a lot of that already. I feel like my life is very full, and I'm very happy with where I am in my life, and I have a wonderful, I only have one kid, one daughter, but she's wonderful. And she's heading off into the literature program at McGill. So I feel like I've really pat myself on the back. Good job, Mom, you're done. In terms of just that aspect of my life, I'm a single parent, I'm a single mom, and I really raised her pretty much by myself, which was quite a challenge. So my dad was a really big part of our lives, and he was a really big support. And so he recently passed. And so that whole experience of him becoming sick during the pandemic and his passing, it has just been something that I'm still grappling with, that I'm still, you know, I think it's the kind of thing that you probably always are dealing with. I also, in my past, had my best friend died unexpectedly when we were in our 40s. So I've had a lot of loss in my life, and I don't know if that's defining or not. I don't know. It's been strange to have those experiences, and how do you develop resilience around those experiences is something that I'm really interested in. I've got my 2 dogs, which we're going to talk about, and I love my very active life with the dogs. And I am a little bit at a point in my life, at a phase in my life, like I guess I'm an empty nester. So I'm at a point in my life where I am going through a real transition with the loss of my dad and my mom now being sick with dementia and on her way out of this world. And my daughter going off to university. I'm at a different point in my life, and it's a strange and weird world, but it's also very, very freeing, and I'm really enjoying that. I'm just really enjoying that aspect of it. I'm sure I'm oversharing. So let's talk about the dogs, because Gemma asked about my dogs. A couple of different people asked about the dogs. Tell me about your older dog. I hope I haven't missed any questions, guys. I've really tried to cover everything. If I missed anything, let me know in the comments below and I'll catch you there. Just quickly to end off the video, I have 2 dogs. I have Fifi, my older dog. And the story about Fifi is that because myself and my daughter's father were separated, we separated when she was very young. She was only 1.5 years when we split up. And at 3 years old, I kind of had in my mind, I'm going to get a dog so the dog can go to the 2 different homes with my daughter so that she feels a sense of comfort and security and family that kind of travels with her. So I did some research, and I found that the Cockapoo was a very good dog. I remember calling up a pet store. I bought my dog at a pet store. This was 20 some years ago. It wasn't frowned on really at the time. I used to go and visit the dogs in the pet store, and my daughter would just really love doing that. And I remember calling and asking for the breed, and they didn't have any. And they said, oh, we'll call you when that breed comes in and let you know. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, they're going to call me and we're going to go and I'm going to come home with a dog. There's no way that when they call me and they say they have the breed that I'm not going to get it. Like, so I was very decided. We brought her home. There's a picture of her as a puppy. And my daughter, being 3 years old, named her Fifi. The name comes from the musical Annie, which was very popular at that time in our lives. We watched it over and over and over again. It's from the song we could call, I don't remember, but it's when they're talking about what to name the dog. Sandy is the name of the dog in the movie, but they say we could call her Fifi or something like that, and that's where the name comes from. And she's a wonderful, wonderful pet. My daughter used to carry her around like this, like by the neck. I would try to say, no, go carry her under her arms. You're gonna kill her. And she would just like say, oh, I guess that's what love is, you know. My daughter would dress her up, and she's just been a wonderful, wonderful pet, very beta. And then when my dad was ill, my daughter had it in her mind that it would be a good idea to get Mom a puppy Mom doesn't have enough people to look after, and it would be a good thing, because we did have a moment where we almost lost Fifi during the pandemic. Like, she got really, really sick, and I think we both thought she was a goner, but she survived. She's 16 years old and she survived. And so my daughter said, for Christmas, I want to get you a puppy, but it's not the kind of gift I can just present to you. I need to talk to you about it. And I thought about it for a bit, and then I was like, okay, yes, let's do it. And we tried to get a rescue, but we eventually decided that a rescue was a bad idea because we already have an older dog in the house, and it just didn't work out. So I ended up just sticking with the same breed and going to a breeder here in Quebec and getting Granola at the breeder. Here's a picture of him on the way home from the breeders. And actually, we were thinking about different names for the new puppy, and we were talking about food names. We had like cannoli, we had spaghetti, we had blueberry, we had a lot of different food names. At one point we were talking about naming him other things, but I remember going to visit my dad and saying, with dog, I took the dog over to see my dad and asking him what he thought of the name Blueberry, and he in a very distinguished manner sort of sat up and said, I think his name should be Granola. And at that point it was done. So the dog's name was decided by my dad, and he's now a big part of our lives. He's completely different from Fifi. He's male, she's female, and he's a lot bigger than I thought he was going to be. And so he kind of demands all of the attention, I would say. Okay, I've definitely talked for too long. I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for submitting your questions. I love you all so much. I really do. I love this community so, so much. And I will look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye for now. Oh, my stomach is growling. I'm getting hungry. It's gonna be lunchtime soon. With all these questions, I'm not gonna be able to have lunch. Where are my videos? I don't know. I don't remember. I don't remember how many different ridiculous things I've shown you about granola. Chewing on a hanger. Yes, playing with a hanger. Yes. Good boy. You just need to be the center of attention, don't you? Yes.